What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the third album by R&B artist Trey Songz. Basically, this album's called Ready, and it came out in the summer of 2009. Now, Trey Songz had particularly hit a pretty large stride in 2009 with this hit album. It got to the sixth single, which is not something that typically kind of happens for like an R&B album. I can't think of too many albums that got that far. Like there were some large ones around this time, and this is kind of right before like the changing of the sounds in R&B 2010s type music with folks like The Weeknd and Drake and Frank Ocean and folks like that, as far as how some of that kind of went, just with more lo-fi kind of chill session, kind of more hangout lo-fi type stuff, and just more streaming type music as far as that kind of goes. But this is kind of where the internet type sensation and things was kind of in place as far as that kind of happened. There's a little bit of that on here, but there's also just some kind of more neo R&B type stuff that just has more kind of in between kind of club hoppers. Like Trey Songz can kind of do, like Trey Songz is pretty good at doing ballads in like certain senses. He's known to do ballads unlike some of his earlier albums from 2005 and 2007. There's also some contemporary type feels about it. So it's kind of, he's not quite as stepping out as much as like T-Pain or Usher or someone like that, but I do feel like there is enough bops on here to kind of have some good jams. And he's prone to having some liquor type songs also. So it's just got some good stuff on here in terms of some of that particular conduct. And I just would have to say this is a pretty overall stellar album that just had a lot of liveliness about it. And in my eyes, I would have to see this as basically like a classic R&B album, especially out of the late 2000s. This one just kind of came out of nowhere. Trey Songz was kind of like middle class. Trey Songz wasn't a front runner for R&B before 2009, but with this particular album and then his 2010 album Passion, Pain, and Pleasure, with this album and then his 2010 album Passion, Pain, and Pleasure, Trey Songz really became like the front runner of R&B for at least the early 2010s as far as that kind of went. I'd say Trey Songz pretty much lasted until about 2015, 2017, somewhere in there, but there just was some good stuff here. And once again, this got to like the sixth single, so it had a ton of contemporariness as far as that kind of went. Just the outing point of just being able to get it. There's some guests on here. Fabulous is on here. Drake is on here a couple of times. Soulja Boy and Gucci Mane are on here. It's just some good stuff that kind of overall happens. And I feel like the particular thing about this particular album is just the fact that, T-Pain was more prone to like drinking songs and that type of stuff. And Usher's a lot more of like a dance R&B type act. And Neo's a lot more suave and stuff. I feel like Trey Songz just had some really kind of almost halfway amorous, just kind of more, I feel like Trey Songz kind of had more halfway amorous, kind of sensual type songs on this particular project. Some of these ballads are pulled off pretty well, and this just feels like, in a lot of ways, just kind of boyfriend music, just in a kind of more homely kind of sense. Not necessarily like as spruced up as Neo or folks like that, or someone like Jay Holiday or folks like that. Some of those type folks are quite as, like, I feel like Trey Songz is not quite as blue blood and quite as suave oriented as like Neo and Jay Holiday and some of those type folks, and like Ryan Leslie and some of them, but also not quite as down pat and low key as like T-Pain and Nate Dogg and some of those type folks. Just a lot more homely in a sense, or a lot more kind of just shots at the bar kind of rugged type atmosphere. I feel like Bobby Valentino is another one that's kind of like that. Bobby V, I would say. So that's just kind of the concept just as far as that kind of happens. But I would look after, this is a pretty good album. Like I was saying, this is like a classic kind of R&B album here. It just did a lot of things right. I do feel like this is like a classic R&B album here. Just did a lot of things right just in the senses of how it kind of happened. Multiple singles that kind of hit all over the R&B and rap charts as far as that kind of went. Some contemporariness, just some good ballads, stuff like that. It's just a good varietized kind of album that just is a good look for Trey Songz. Even though I'd probably say I give this album a higher score. I don't remember, like 8 years ago I reviewed Passion, Pain, and Pleasure, so it's been a while since I touched base with Trey Songz, but I have to say I don't remember what I gave that album, but I did like that album. I still say that that album connects with me quite a bit, but I do like this album too. This one, it feels just like by the album cover that this would be kind of like a summer album, but it really isn't wholesome like that. I'd say there's not a ton of kind of summery songs on here. If you're looking for a song like Bottoms Up or something like that, this is kind of like a summer boiler. There's really not like, I feel like maybe I Need a Girl. I feel like songs like I Need a Girl, LOL, Smiley Face, and Say Ah are some decent kind of summer tunes as far as that kind of happens. But overall, I look after this. This is a pretty multi-seasonal type project, and just as an overall kind of R&B loud pack package to kind of have in your tape deck or CD player for a while as far as that kind of goes, your car stereo as far as that kind of happens. I just would have to say, so it's just kind of the concept. It's got some good stuff on here. So there's 6 singles, like I was saying. I'll go ahead and talk about these. So one of which is on Drake's album So Far Gone. So Drake and Trey Songz had a series of pair ups that they did throughout the late 2000s, early 2010s and stuff. And this is one that's kind of a good one. This is kind of an almost song just because you can find it. Successful is an almost song just because you can find it on Drake's So Far Gone. You can get it on either album, but I just would say it's a pretty good song yet and still. So I basically recommend all 6 of the singles on here. And this is going to show why Trey Songz has a pretty hit album on his hands. So Successful is basically a midday kind of dreary commerce song, I would have to say. It's kind of preoccupied, but it's kind of a halfway makeshift kind of gem. This is just one that kind of feels like an uptown kind of in the car type song as far as just traverse, just that in that sort of context. This kind of feels like a kind of city type tune, something that you get out of Mac Miller just without the R&B sense about it. Someone like Mac Miller, Big Sean, those type folks. Just someone on the East Coast as far as that kind of feels. I like the concept of this kind of having like a decent kind of relatively big city type feel about it. This kind of just feels like a cloudy kind of midday dreariness as far as that kind of goes. I just like the commerce type feel of this one. It's just interesting because this feels more like a Drake song than a Trey Songz song, but Trey Songz is a pretty good fit for this song. So it's just kind of interesting one, but I do like the concept of kind of getting some of this midday commerce as far as that kind of goes. There are some kind of makeshift tunes on here. So it's kind of the concept is Trey Songz does a little bit of that. Trey Songz does a little bit of that on here. So there is some good concepts. Like one, for example, that's kind of some makeshift kind of commerce is I Need a Girl. And I Need a Girl is the second single. This is basically a stock kind of makeshift kind of endearing R&B type song, I would have to say. It's some day commerce down pat, and it's just got a good execution of a radio single. It's just got a good execution of a radio single, I would have to say, and it's just a nice bop. So this is definitely one that feels like something Rihanna or Kelly Clarkson would do, something in that sense. It's just kind of like a pretty standard kind of makeshift R&B type tune, just in like a more day kind of commerce sense as far as that kind of goes. Just very lackadaisical. This radio ready just really feels like a real relaxed kind of lambent tune. It's a little bit out of the ordinary for Trey Songz because he really didn't do too many more songs like this, at least from what I've seen. I don't remember this being on Chapter 5 or much of like Passion, Pain, and Pleasure, some of those type ones. So this is just kind of one. This works as like a good kind of commerce tune as far as that kind of goes, but it's another one just like Successful. It just kind of has like some makeshift appeal about it, just more blue collar type stuff. Pretty good song, just good melodies on there, good kind of lackadaisical kind of acoustic guitar licks on I Need a Girl as far as that kind of goes. And it's definitely a pretty good summery type tune just for spring and summer as far as that kind of goes, I would have to say. So LOL Smiley Face is the second single, and this has Gucci Mane and Soulja Boy on there to back. This has Gucci Mane and Soulja Boy on there to back Trey Songz up. So this is like a good southern bounce of a song, I would have to say. It's just a nice, rousy kind of phone handy cut, I would have to say. It's very phone oriented, definitely a good song for that. The melodies hit pretty well, and it's just a choice kind of commercial R&B type tune. So I would say about this particular one, this is a pretty good boppish kind of one. It's a little bit more frivolous and just kind of more lighthearted, just one of the more kind of just like plastic kind of songs I'd have to say on this particular album. I do like the concept of getting this one. It's just a nice kind of boppish one. Just kind of like there's just I like the concept of getting some of these just because this was kind of a trendy song back in 2009 when it kind of hit. So this is kind of one where like phone type songs where cell phone type stuff wasn't always talked about like 2003, 2005 and stuff, but by 2007, 2008, 2009 these were starting to make further appearances, and like the leet speak and that type of stuff, LOL type things were starting to be in songs as far as that kind of went. So it's just an early kind of one for that sort of phone talk as far as that kind of went. So it's a good one, especially in an R&B sense, especially in an R&B sense, but the fourth single is I Invented Sex, and this has Drake on there. This is kind of a vanilla R&B straightforward club hopper, I would have to say. It's just got a sugary approach, and it's good for a routine kind of night out. This is definitely a good boppish one. This is pretty vanilla type song, I'd have to say. This one's not quite as exhilarating as say Aw, or quite as peppy and preppy as like LOL Smiley Face, but I just would have to overall say it's a pretty good boppish one just for like a good vanilla night out, just a standard kind of typical kind of evening or night, something like that as far as that kind of goes. Just a nice one to kind of have. Now, most of the time nightclubs get a lot more like ravenous and kind of raucous as far as that kind of went. So this is just kind of a vanilla one for just like a sugary. If you can find nightclubs that kind of have more R&B tunes as opposed to like trap music and just overall ravenous rap music or country music or pop music or just things of that nature where you actually can find some nightclubs that have some R&B. This would be a good vanilla one to kind of have. Just a good overall thrilling song, probably like a banner song for Trey Songz. This is just kind of a banner hit for Trey Songz. This is definitely a regular staple for him and just probably one of his more profound hits out of his career that I would have to say, and especially in the times as of nowadays. It's just probably a better one. I mean, he has tons of hits, but this is one that continues to resonate as far as like reflecting on the past 15, 16 years or so, I'd have to say. Just got real hooky as far as that kind of goes. Say Ah with Fabulous is the fifth single, and this is like a thrilling nightclub flash. Definitely one of the best songs on this album. It's a nightclub flash with like a magnificent hook on there. It's suave, but it's loose enough to kind of get crunk to, and it's just an overall dope song. So this one just has a real kind of snappy and kind of peppy type appeal about it. That this is like a real good club bounce. It's an easy one to kind of throw your hands high and dance a little bit to. Just a nice, good nightclub. It's a nice, good nightclub bop as far as that kind of happens. Just a thrilling one to kind of have. Just easy, exhilarating, nice electro kind of beat on here, and Fabulous really helps the song. It's just some good pairings to kind of have, just an easy kind of one. But there's not a ton of songs like this on here. I mean, I'd say apart from I Invented Sex, Say Ah, and then Brand New, I'd probably say that those are about the only real other ones. And maybe one other one, Be Where You Are, is kind of a similar one to it. Not quite a full-blown nightclub song, but in the vernacular of it. So there's just, it's kind of, like I was saying, it's a lot more sensual, just kind of more boyfriend type music, just in a kind of more hangout type sense of just kind of being just more in like residential kind of just typical kind of round the house type fare, or at least just round the block type fare as far as that kind of happens. I just would have to say, but it does work in that sort of sense. There is some stepping out type moments, I'd have to say, but that's just kind of the concept. But then Neighbors Know My Name is the sixth single, and this is the one. But then Neighbors Know My Name is the sixth single, and this is kind of another good one. This is 6 for 6 for Trey Songz, but this is probably the one that I connected with the least. Not to say it's a horrid song or a bad song or something that's not good in some sense, but this is probably the one. This is kind of like a more ballad-esque type one that just has a lot more lazy kind of energy. This is kind of more typical of like early 2000s and late 90s R&B type fare, but Trey Songz does a pretty good job of pulling it off. This is just kind of a lazy, summery R&B haze, I'd have to say. It's a better example of like a ballad type feel about it, and it's just kind of it's a better example of like a ballad type single, I would have to say, and it's a hangout cut with like a good vibe about it. So this one just kind of has like a good kind of guitar twangs about it, just really kind of almost acoustic like guitar as far as that kind of happens. It's probably like a more relaxed version of I Need a Girl. Just has that same kind of twang about that, but just a little bit more kind of malaise, just in that sort of concept. It's definitely great for just definitely good for like tied down, kind of more laid back type hangout type fare. I would have to say just a good bop for that sort of sense. It's just a good kind of concept as far as that kind of goes. Just a good R&B type tune, strictly for like the R&B charts as far as that kind of happens. Not quite as jivey, not quite as electric, but it's just an example of like a more hangout type ballad that just pulls off the energy pretty well. It's a more down tempo type song that works. Those kind of things. So out of there's 17 songs on this particular album. I'm reviewing the deluxe edition, so minus the 3 interludes. There's actually 20 songs on here, but minus the 3 interludes, there's 17 songs. And out of those 17, I wound up recommending to you 14, or really 13 and a half, because Successful is, or really 13 and a half because Successful is an almost song, because you can find it on the Drake album. But basically 14 songs. So the only 3 songs I don't recommend would just be the only 3 songs I don't recommend would just be Jupiter Love, Black Roses, and then Yo Side of the Bed. Which, to talk about those 3 songs, like Jupiter Love is just kind of like a more kind of sensual ballad in the sense of like the same sort of fashion as Neighbors Know My Name, but just not quite as catchy as that particular one. That was just one I didn't mesh with as much. And then Black Roses had a nice electronic kind of beat on there, but it just didn't handle the approach of that particular song that well. It's just a bad execution of as to how to handle a beat like that. Just didn't really work that well. It's probably trying to be like a more up-tempo kind of contemporary kind of electro R&B, but just didn't do it that well. And then Yo Side of the Bed is just a real kind of more lambent version of Jupiter Love, where I feel like Neighbors Know My Name is kind of down tempo, but then a few shades lighter than that, or a few shades more sluggish than that, is Jupiter Love, and then a few more shades more sluggish than Jupiter Love is Yo Side of the Bed. So these are just kind of some definite ballad type ones, but both of these just didn't quite hit as heavily. I mean, Trey Songz at least pulled it off on the single version of that, but some of these just didn't quite have enough kind of this electric kind of feel to really kind of precipitate much kind of good jive about it as far as that kind of happens. It's not real good compellingness. So I just would have to say, but talk about some of these songs I do recommend. I feel like Brand New is definitely a pretty good nightclub song. Brand New is definitely a highlight on here. This is kind of a low-key, kind of dramatic nightclub spruced up pizzazz. I would have to say it's a getting ready to step out tune. Definitely, it's just some good evening fun. So this is definitely another song that this album definitely needed. Just kind of a more kind of thrilling sense of exhilaration and kind of just having some jive about it, just in a more kind of sense. I definitely feel like there's some singles on here, but sometimes albums will do that where you get like Confessions by Usher, for example. There weren't a ton of nightclub songs apart from Usher's Yeah, and I would have to say it's kind of within that pitch. There are some good singles that have some boppish type appeal, but I was just wondering if the album is going to be like that. And this is a classic album. Like, I'm going to give this a pretty high score, but just in terms of like nightlife, there's not a ton of songs like that. But I do feel like Brand New is a pretty good example of that. Be Where You Are is definitely a highlight for some nightlife on here. This is an enthralling, getting ready to step out hit. I would definitely have to say it's got a nice electro chorus on there, and it's just some vanilla night commute. I would have to say. So this is kind of one that kind of gives goosebumps for getting ready to have a good night time as far as that kind of happens. Just the commerce and the commerce and the fair, just like night appeal as far as that kind of happens. Just the outing point and just some of those moments, like going to a billiards hall, going to a dance club, going to a rave, something like that. As far as that kind of happens, just in an R&B sense, where it's not quite as full blown a dance type hit as far as that kind of happens, but it's just one that kind of gives some good energy and overall vibe. So it's a nice one. A pretty good hangout tune on here is Does He Do It? This is kind of a rosy hangout cut. I would have to say it's a hands full track, and it's just got a sugary kind of high mid-tempo R&B glaze feel about it, and it's just kind of a boppish album cut. So this just has a lot of plush feelings about it. This is definitely a very sugary saccharine type one that just works pretty well. This is another essential one, but it's just not quite a down tempo one. Like I was talking about, some of the ballads that are just a lot more sluggish and just kind of like languish as far as that kind of happened in like a peppy sense. But I just would say this is a good example, one that just kind of has some of that sensual kind of R&B type feel, but it does have some mid-tempo kind of drive. So it's a hangout song, but it's not sluggish one. So that's definitely a good concept as far as getting that. Another highlight on here is One Love. This is a day after hours, just got done with work kind of cut. I would have to say it's some ruminating, I definitely feel like, and it's just the relaxed kind of breezy commerce, I would feel like, and it's just an overall good album cut. It's another kind of highlight on this particular album. So this is definitely one. There's some ones on here, like there's one that I was thinking of, like I Need a Girl. That's definitely some midday kind of commerce. And I feel like there was another one on here that I'm forgetting about. Oh, there's just another one on here, but I would definitely say that One Love is definitely like after hours commerce as far as that kind of happens. I just would have to say like I Need a Girl is definitely good for that, and One Love is definitely good for that, and oh yeah, Love Lost is another one that's good for that. So Love Lost is another one. To talk about Love Lost, I would definitely have to say Love Lost, this is kind of a bleary, kind of drizzling day, kind of day commerce cut. I feel like this is something that you could listen to kind of on like a rainy but still kind of sunny day as far as that kind of happens. It's kind of a haphazard day. I feel like it's kind of a good reflective, kind of ruminating cut, definitely, and it has character, and it's just a pretty stock hit. So this is another stock hit for Trey Songz. It's kind of a ruminating type song just for day commerce and just kind of contemplative type stuff as far as that kind of happens. Just some good kind of in between the motions type feels as far as that kind of happens. Just makeshift kind of commerce and just things like that. Just got done with work or just getting ready to pay some bills, get some errands done, stuff like that. Just kind of just regular day commute. Definitely some good makeshift on here. I'm glad there's a few songs like that. Scratching Me Up is a pretty nice one. This is an evening after hours jam. I would have to say it has dreary kind of night feel about it, and it's a ritzy kind of hangout fair, I would have to say, and it's good for some nightlife. So this is definitely one that has like a social kind of feel about it, but it's just kind of in a more wind down type mode as things start to simmer down and things like that. Just kind of becomes more of like hangout fair, just in a kind of electric. Things start to simmer down, just kind of an electric type sense, but it just kind of has like a more ambient type energy about it. Definitely kind of an in-betweener between like a lively type song, like something like Be Where You Are or I Invented Sex or Say All or something like that, but then not quite as lazy as or not quite as lazy as like Neighbors Know My Name and some of those type ones, or Neighbors Know My Name, or like Jupiter Love, or some of those type ones. So I just would have to say it's just kind of a decent kind of down tempo, just a decent kind of down mid tempo type hit as far as that kind of happens. Just has a powerful emphasis about it that just kind of works in like a jury kind of sense, just as some leftover promo. I would definitely have to say You Belong to Me is another highlight on here. This is kind of an emphatic ladies cut, I would have to say. It has a dramatic feel about it that hits well, I would definitely have to say, and it's just some nice kind of after hours groove, definitely. So this is kind of another one, has like a pretty strong emphasis, I would definitely have to suppose. The emphasis about this particular one, there's some ones at the end of this album, like there's definitely some ones at the end of this album like You Belong to Me and Scratching Me Up that just have a more imposed kind of feel about them, just in like a dramatic kind of emphasis as far as that kind of happens. Just some good kind of chilling ones that kind of have that, are just kind of powerful kind of mid-tempo type ones. They're not quite as jivey and electric as Say On, some of those type ones, and I Invented Sex, but also not quite as down tempo. So it's just kind of some good mid tempo ones. I'm glad that Trey Songz can put out some hit mid tempo songs. It's another good highlight to kind of have, because you know sometimes R&B only has like the up tempo and down tempo songs, so it's good to kind of have that. But then Another highlight on here to kind of fill out the rest of this album is just a good one to kind of have is Holla If You Need Me. But then another good highlight on this album that kind of showcases the classic appeal of this particular album is Holla If You Need Me. This is a real nice one on here. This is kind of a balmy, kind of long time no see type track, I would have to say. It's just a vibey kind of summer haze, definitely. It's a living quick kind of social cut. So this is definitely a long time no see type tune to kind of have on here just to rekindle interest with chicas as far as that kind of happens. Just a living quick kind of social cut, just like the appeal of this particular one. Just an overall kind of highlighted one. That's just kind of another kind of offhanded one to kind of have. Just kind of works in like pretty much like a relatively, I mean, this one's another kind of summary one, kind of similar to Neighbors Know My Name and like LOL smiley face and some of those type ones and I Need a Girl, but it's just kind of another good affable kind of one that just kind of works in like a good highlighted kind of sense. Definitely like the balminess of this particular song. It's just an overall nice one. It's kind of one to kind of get some rebound game kind of going as far as like Holla If You Need Me is just kind of a good rebound game song to get going with some of the ladies as far as that kind of happens just within that sense, definitely. So it's just a good highlighted one to kind of have. So this is overall just a pretty good multifaceted and varietized type album to kind of have on here. So me definitely liking 13 and a half songs out of 17 on here. I'm going to go ahead and give this, so me recommending 13 and a half songs out of 17 on this particular album. I'm going to go ahead and give this album like a 10 out of 10. There's a lot of good varietized type moments on here. Definitely some good stuff. Even though this is kind of a more sensual and kind of more tied down type project, definitely like some boyfriend type fare, just in a more kind of homely and residential type sense. There are some good night bop-ish kind of moments. It just doesn't happen oftenly, maybe about 2/5 or 2/6 of the time, about a third of the time you could get something like that. But it's just overall kind of the appeal of it. This is a pretty good varietized R&B album, but it's just kind of more in a traditional sense. This is kind of where it takes some of the R&B aspects of like the late 90s, early 2000s before B2K and Beyonce and T-Pain and Akon and some of them, and just kind of provides it in just like an aspect of kind of sense where it's contemporary, but it doesn't forget the old traditions that R&B was kind of made up of. So you get some ballads on here, some sensual songs, some kind of tied down moments, some makeshift moments, some nightclub songs, some stepping out, some drinking songs, some summer songs, some stuff like that. Just has an overall lot of appeal. Just to say the three minor songs I didn't enjoy was just more in like the ballad sense. So it's really not terribly much to kind of complain about. It's just kind of just minor mishaps. So I just would say 10 out of 10. The social score of this album, I'm going to go ahead and give it 10 out of 10 because there's just not many R&B albums that get to the sixth single. So there's a lot of good things to talk about on this particular project. Now, I do feel like in terms of like the stepping out kind of sense, that's debatable, but I just feel like because there's six singles, I just think that makes up for it. There's plenty to kind of talk about in that sort of sense. Popular album for the ladies, popular album in some cases for your buds and stuff like that as far as that kind of happens. It's just kind of the concept that just know that it's kind of more homely, I would have to say, in like a more traditional sense. But it's just kind of the concept. So in terms of the future, like Trey Songz has been quiet for the past good while. I think he put out a project like in 2018. I know he dropped a double album in 2018, then he dropped an album in 2020, but I don't know what he's been up to across the past several years. He's kind of had like a court case and things like that. So it's just kind of, I would like to get some more tunes as far as that kind of happens. So we'll see what happens with that. But this is definitely a classic R&B type album, especially out of the late 2000s, early 2010s, as far as that kind of happens. So yeah, I definitely recommend investing in this.